This is our little recording studio where we make, actually make music in here these days. It's not like the old days with the big tape recorders and the giant studios like we worked at RCA when we were doing the Monkees. Tommy and I said, let's walk down to the park. Tommy started snapping his fingers to the beat of our walking pace, and with his snaps I started doing and began to sing, here we come walking down the street. Of course, that's what we were doing at the time, is walking down the street. Here we come walking down the street, we get the funniest looks from everyone we meet.
Hey, we're the Monkees, and people say we monkey around, but we're too busy singing to put anybody down.
In 1967, 4 unknown actors in a kids' TV show became the biggest pop band in the world. In America, they outsold Elvis and the Beatles combined. They were the Monkees.
Hey, we're the Monkees, and people say we monkey.
I remember the first day showing up, and it was, oh, hi, Mike. You remember Mike? Oh, yeah, I'm from the audition. Oh, hi. David, Mickey, Peter, hi, nice to meet you. You guys are the Monkees.
But the Monkees were not a real band. They were a man-made, money-making machine, driven by ego and ambition. A machine that would ultimately crash and burn.
And people say we monkey around.
Was I a hired hand, or was I an integral part of the action? If I was integral, let me play. If I was a hired hand, stop making nicey nice to me.
They smiled at us and they told us how great we were, and behind our backs they said any 4 guys could have done this.
They were full of themselves. They were TV stars, and they felt they didn't need me anymore, and they figured they had talent, which they really didn't have.
This is the inside story of the rise and fall of pop music's first manufactured band.
Put anybody down.
In 1965, Beatlemania swept across America, leaving behind a turned-on teenage audience hungry for more of the band's heady mix of rock and roll, mop tops and quirky humor. This was a new generation with something to say and money to spend. In Hollywood, 2 hotshot television producers, Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, had a plan to cash in on the pop phenomenon. The scheme involved creating a fictional band, one with its own weekly TV show. Soon, Rafelson began scouring California for young wannabes.
I put an ad in the paper, and it said something like, must come down for interview, meaning if you were on drugs, you had to be straight.
Rafelson held open auditions at Columbia Studios, determined to find 4 zany boys who could fit the mold of the Beatles and tap into their ready-made market.
437 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 17-year-olds lined up all along this wall waiting to get into an office. A lot of guys with instruments and a lot of guys swacked out of their minds. And then they would come in here.
The first Monkee to be cast was a former child actor and jockey from Manchester.
Wow, this must be my room. This is the Davy Jones band. I was 19 and I'd signed a contract with Columbia Pictures. I was a contract player. I went through the process of auditions and the rest of it, but I'd understood I was in the show regardless.
Views are spontaneous and unrehearsed.
What do you want me to do?
I thought David Jones was handsome. I thought he was uncommonly small. I thought he had had an interesting career already, and he had a lovely voice.
Really? How fine is that? Let me see what the girls are doing. I'll be right back.
Another child actor pushed his way to the front of the queue. Mickey Dolenz was a Los Angeles boy and no stranger to Hollywood auditions.
Well, I was a working actor at the time in Los Angeles, and I'd gone out for auditions all my life. I mean, I was a child actor. Come in.
Mickey I liked for his phenomenal energy. He had a funny face. He liked using and wearing his funny face. And he had not only an interesting singing voice that I thought would do well on records, but he had a very good speaking voice.
I was a screaming rock and roller, which is probably why I ended up singing a lot of the stuff, because I was the only one that could go, wah! You know, like Little Richard. Okay, ready to go.
Folk singer Peter Tork was working as a dishwasher in LA when he got the call to go to the auditions.
They took me into Bert Schneider's office, and he offered me a cigarette, and I said, I don't smoke those. And he said, well, you can't be stoned on the set. And I went, okay.
Peter Tork had, for me, a very beguiling face, the kind of face that I could equate in my mind's eye with Harpo Marx.
Finally, Mike Nesmith arrived on set. A young and ambitious country singer whose wealthy mother had invented Tipp-Ex, the Texan played it cool and was quick to make a strong impression.
My name is Michael Black.
Mike showed leadership right from the outset. His humor was much drier.
Do you think you're a goof? Do you?
No.
My feeling was he would lend a kind of calming presence to the unruliness of the others.
What is that? What do you want me to be? Strong and silent?
Yeah, be strong and silent.
That turned out to be the full compliment, and we never had any doubts about the four.
From the outside, casting four industry nobodies seemed like a huge gamble, but the producers believed they were onto a winning formula.
They came up with, basically four people that matched the temperaments of the Beatles. So you had the intellectual, nerdy element of John Lennon was Michael Nesmith, and you had the cute, cuddly Ringo you might think of as Mickey Dolenz. And then you think of George Harrison, the more quiet, mystical one would have been Peter Tork. And who are we missing? We're missing Paul McCartney. Well, that would be Davy Jones.
The Monkees evolved out of everything that came before, and John Lennon said, the Monkees are nothing like the Beatles, they're more like the Marx Brothers, and he was talking in a Birmingham accent at the time, so...
Monkees, you say? Yes. There's something primitive about them, Vanessa. Hey, give me a G.
The Monkees were seemingly the complete manufactured band, but there was one major ingredient missing from the perfect pop formula. They had no songs.
They came to me as the man who knew what to do with the music, and I said to people, I believe I'll outsell the Beatles.
In 1966, Hollywood TV producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider brought four unknown young men together to try and create a show around their band, the Monkees.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, go!
You want to try it one more
But
time?
cast only for their looks and characters, the Monkees had no music for their show. Instead, New York music maestro Don Kirshner was drafted in to supply the hits.
Donnie was riding a peak of being aware of what the musical taste of the day was. At that time, he really was the man with the golden ear.
Kirshner was known in the industry as a hit maker, although he had very little to do with the music. But what he was kind of like your godfather, in a sense.
Initially, the Monkees had been promised they could record their own music, but Don Kirshner had other plans.
Well, when I walked in, Mickey Dolenz wasn't even a drummer. Davy, other than playing maracas, Peter Tork was a semi-ordinary guitar player with no voice to speak of, and Mike Nesmith was a country singer. I don't know who would want those elements when he walks into the studio. That was frightening to me.
Look who's here, the Monkees. Yeah. Now, the last group of the contest, the Monkees!
Don Kirshner had no intention of letting the Monkees become a real band. In the studio, he allowed them to add only the vocals to tracks he'd already recorded with his team of hit writers and musicians.
Quickly, it became evident that we weren't going to have anything to do with the music, except singing, of course. We did all the singing. Peter tells the story of going into one of the early sessions with his bass guitar, and they said, "What are you doing here?"
Voice and Heart invited me to the studio, and I came with my guitar. And they said, "Peter, this is the track. We're done." "Well, but I've got this great idea." "Peter, this is the track. We're done. We just invited you as a courtesy." Whoa.
Before the TV show hit the air, Don Kirshner needed to launch the Monkees with a big hit single. He turned to ace writers Bobby Hart and Tommy Boyce, whose inspiration once again came from the original Fab Four.
I heard just the tail end of Paperback Writer, and it was just the fade out. And I was going, Paperback Writer. And I thought the guy was saying, I thought McCartney or whoever was singing was saying, "Take the last train." I thought that's what I heard in my mind, you know. And ended up with a kind of a Beatlesque. We told Louis Sheldon, "Hey, play me something like Day Tripper." And he said, "How about this?" Dun, 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 dun. So he had it right in his head, you know.
Take the last train to Clarksville and I'll meet you at the station. You can be here by 4:30, 'cause I've made your reservation. Don't be slow. No, no, no. No, no, no. 'Cause I'm leaving in the morning and I must see you again.
We also snuck in a little war protest bit of it because it was about a guy going off and not knowing if he was going to come back from the war. Couldn't get too heavy, though, for the 6-year-olds.
And I don't know if I'm ever coming home.
I was terrified when I put out Last Train to Clarksville, but I loved the train idea. I was gambling, but I thought that the feel of it, the beat, would capture the, American public.
Don Kirshner's instincts were proved correct as the single rocketed up the charts and the Monkees unleashed a charm offensive on the American public.
Take the last train to Clarksville. Now I must hang up the phone. I can't hear you in this noisy railroad station. All alone, I'm feeling low.
We took the Monkees to New York. I believe we had their first record on a stage. And the audience went bananas. And at this point, the show hadn't even been on the air yet. Perhaps there was some promos on the air. And I thought, my goodness, this is going to be much bigger than I thought it was.
Take the last train to Clarksville.
But it wasn't just American teenagers who were taking a close interest in the Monkees phenomenon.
'Cause I've made your reservation. Don't be slow.
There was a lot of big industry players involved, but it was the first time that all of these industries, including the radio industry, had all kind of sort of joined forces in this concerted sort of assault.
Take the last train to Clarksville.
Before the Monkees were even on the television screen, they were crafting all sorts of things to go with the show so that when the show was on the air, instantly you would go to the store and there would be something for you to buy.
I didn't even see a lot of the merchandise until long after the show was off the air. Maybe they kept it from us, I don't know. We never got anything for that. And I could be bitter, but am I bitter? No.
Fellas, part of the contest rules. Every applicant must submit to exploitation and publicity, right? Right. Beautiful, baby.
The Monkees essentially signed a contract for a pilot They signed away their name and likeness to be used on dolls and lunchboxes and everything else, and they were guaranteed a weekly salary of about $400 a week.
The Monkees had signed basic contracts for their TV show, unaware of the millions about to be raked in by Monkey Mania.
Wait! What? What is it? A brilliant idea.
Well?
That's what we need, a brilliant idea.
The TV show premiered on NBC in September 1966 and was an instant hit. To the viewers, it looked genuinely innovative, a potent mix of wacky humor, crazy plots, and catchy pop.
Hi, fellas. Listen, we need an idea for the show, you know. Gotta be something fast and groovy and hip and everything, you know. Can you do it?
For producers Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson, the show reflected their own status as young mavericks on the Hollywood scene.
Bob Rafelson did come down on the set, and he was great and very, very, hyper, and, he put that energy into us, and he kept us going with that kind of idea. And Schneider was, more the money man up in the office, and he came down a few times, a good-looking, tall, 6'3", handsome man. He was like a movie star himself. I think they were very, very talented, and they were very ahead of their time to be able to think they would get away with putting a show like this on the television.
The program had a kind of slightly anti-establishment attitude about it. I felt this was an itinerant band. They were living in a funny house together, and wherever they went, there was a bit of resistance to their style, their personality, their long hair, and their aggressiveness.
Arrogant egomaniacs.
Long-haired weirdos.
Loathsome teenagers.
Delightful and well-bred.
Who wrote that?
My mother.
Let's dance on. Oh, baby, come on.
At that time, the only time you saw long-haired kids on television, they were being arrested. That was one of the reasons it was so successful, because it spoke to all those kids around the country.
34-135.
Look, Mom, see? The Monkees have long hair and wear bell-bottoms and paisley underwear, and they're okay. They're just nice guys and helping people and stuff like that.
Come on, baby. Let me see how you work. Let's dance on. Oh, baby, come on.
There wasn't so much going on in terms of the plots. I don't think plots mattered on the Monkees. Davy meets girl, girlfriend's mother doesn't like Davy, band sings a song, Davy gets back with the girl, everyone's happy, there's stars in his eyes.
Now hang on, baby. I'm gonna slip it with you. Oh, yeah. Let's dance on.
Everything has a rhythm to it. Everything is on a beat. And it's more based on the fast advertisements you would see at the time. There was nothing else on television like the Monkees really anywhere in the world.
Midway through the Monkees' first series, millions were tuning into the show and buying their records. And life for the four unknown actors who'd walked off the street just a few months before was becoming very different.
They went from nobodies to overnight stars. They're on television every week. Their records are #1. Their merchandise is all over the place. They were unavoidable. It was white hot.
I remember we had a Christmas break, and so I had a couple of days off to do my Christmas shopping. And I got in the car, drove down to the mall, going through the sliding big doors of the mall, and I do remember this quite clearly. All of a sudden, I heard a lot of people screaming and running at me. And I thought, shit, there's a fire. I turned around and I ran out of the building. Fire, everybody get out, get out. And I ran out into the parking lot. And I turned around and I looked, and everybody kept running at me, mostly young girls. And I thought, oh my God, it's just like, wait a minute, I got to do my shopping. And I had to leave. I was really pissed off. I had to leave. That's the first time I really got a real taste of what had happened.
The Monkees' debut album topped the American charts for 13 weeks, selling over 3 million copies. But their plans to record their own material cut no ice with Don Kirshner. Craving even greater commercial success, he already had another producer and hot young writer in his sights.
I brought in Jeff for one reason. I knew he was very close to Neil Diamond, and I had my eyes on Neil Diamond after hearing Cherry Cherry. I knew if I got a song close to that, I could have a #1 smash with the boys.
I was producing Neil Diamond, and Don asked if I would be interested in, producing the Monkees. That's pretty much of a yes.
Neil Diamond walked into my office with a guitar, and he plays me. I saw her face, and I'm a believer. I don't even know if I heard the rest. I said, that's it.
I'm a Believer was the song that was chosen to be the centerpiece of the songs I was going to cut with them. And everybody seemed to think it had potential, and it was very polite, and so on and so forth. Except Mike. Mike said, I'm a producer too. These words have stuck in my head all these years. I'm a producer too, and that ain't no hit.
I thought love was only true in fairy tales, meant for someone else, but not for me.
After Last Train to Clarksville, I figured I'd walk in and they'd listen. But it got worse. Ho-hum, I'm a Believer, it's okay, not great. I'd rather do one of Mike's songs.
Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love.
I really didn't care, because there was no way in the world that was not going to be their next record. They could have ranted and raved like they did. Davey and Mickey usually went along with me. Peter was on the fence, always siding with Mike.
It's fair to say from the start that Michael Nesmith and Don Kirshner came from different worlds. Here you have Nesmith, this Tex-Mex troubadour, and then on the other side you have Don Kirshner, a rag trade salesman dressed up as a pop merchant. And so there was a natural clash that was bound to happen.
Now I'm a believer.
Well, they were a problem for me and a pain in the neck most of the time. But it was very rewarding, because I said to myself, forget about the great writers. I'm actually going to outsell the Beatles.
Kirshner got what he wanted, as I'm a Believer topped the US charts, becoming the best-selling single of 1967. But with success came even greater friction, as the Monkees tried to break out of their cage.
The Monkees phenomenon takes a dramatic left turn after that record. They wanted to record their own music, their hair goes wild, and their egos are exploding. So there's really two parts of the Monkees story. There's the first part of the story, which is this very manufactured phenomenon, and there's this second part of the story, which is this runaway train.
I had just made them effectively the biggest band in the world, on television, on records, and they really showed me very little respect.
Now the Monkees' runaway train was on a collision course with their heavyweight hitmaker. Casualties, it seemed, would be unavoidable. In 1967, 4 young wannabes in LA were transformed into international superstars.
I'm not your stepping stone.
They were the cast of a hit TV show, playing members of the fictional pop group, the Monkees. They enjoyed unprecedented success, outselling Elvis and the Beatles combined. But their adoring fans were unaware they provided only the vocals on their hits. And now the band was desperate to start flexing its musical muscles.
We evolved from being, actors that played to a good garage band, Every time they weren't filming and they were setting the next scene, we plugged in and we were playing.
But the Monkees were still rookies when it came to performing before an audience. Now though, with fans to satisfy and money to be made, they were under pressure to go on the road and play massive stadium gigs. Finally, it seemed that the Monkees would have to stand up and be heard in front of thousands of hysterical fans.
All of a sudden, we were on the road, and we were out in front of thousands of kids screaming their heads off. They couldn't have cared less. I don't think they could even hear it. I couldn't hear it. All I heard was my voice coming off the back wall 2 seconds later. Take the last train to take the.
When you did the shows, you lived in a tunnel. You lived in the hallways and down the hallways and into the limousine and into the backstage of the show, and then blowy, it's all over there, and there's 18,000 screaming kids, and then back into the tunnel, and back the tunnel takes you back to your hotel room, and into the next tunnel, and the bus, and the limo, and the train, and what have you, and the plane, and that was it.
We didn't have groupies, We didn't have people trying to slip into our rooms, and we weren't out there, I mean, I was more interested in their mothers than I were in them, you know what I mean? I mean, I've got underwear older than most of my girlfriend's mothers, you know what I'm saying?
Once we went on the road, they couldn't control it anymore because we were there playing live in front of all these audiences. And that was in a way, that was a different Monkee group.
As the band members began to forge their own identity, they became increasingly disillusioned. Their exclusion from the recording studio, except to lay down their vocals, infuriated them. And when producer Don Kirshner released the second Monkees album without their knowledge, relations hit an all-time low.
We had been on the road performing as a band, and we had learned how to do it. The second album came out, we had never heard the final album. We were on the road, somebody went across the street and bought the album.
When that record came out, the shit hit the fan. That was it. That was the nuclear bomb going off for the phenomenon. Things were never the same.
As the storm continued to brew, it was the temperamental Texan, Mike Nesmith, who became the most vocal and volatile Monkee.
Mike was an againster all the time. He'd question the dialogue, he'd question the music, he wouldn't show up for some of the shows. And meanwhile, the three of us, we just, where's Mike? But where's Mike?
There was a lot of frustration for me. There was I wanted to get on with my life's work. I wanted to get on with doing certain things, and felt like I was lost in the Monkees. I had ideas, but I just didn't have any way to express them.
My relationship with Mike was always difficult and troubled. You've got to understand, I had a pop group that I was putting out. I had to follow with a pop record after the last train to Clarksville. Fortunately, the second record was I'm a Believer. He wanted to do country songs.
Just a loudmouth Yankee, I went down to Mexico. I didn't have much time to spend, about a week or so.
Finally, Mike Nesmith revealed to a shocked public the band's guilty secret. That they were synthetic, man-made, and worst of all, didn't play on their records.
It was Michael who blew the whistle on us. He said, tell the people we're fake because by God we are, which was just his way of sabotaging everything. I was upset myself because I had a Pinocchio complex. I wanted to be a real life boy. I didn't want to be a puppet anymore.
Mike Nesmith's revelations caused outrage. The Monkees were vilified as a crude and cynical rip-off of the Beatles. Nothing more than a tacky prefab four.
Why this was such a controversy is hard to explain to somebody now. Now, fake is in. Fake is good, but at the time, fake was not good. In fact, fake was considered the worst thing you could be at the time.
What am I doing hanging round? I should be on that train and gone. I should be riding on that train to San Antonio.
Fundamentally, I think the Monkees began to feel maligned by the public and in the press. It was as if somebody was saying they had no talent without Donnie Kirshner. And Donnie Kirshner, as I recall, was not a modest man. He liked taking the credit.
Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson called me up one day and said the boys would like creative control. Having the Monkees want to write their own material, to me, was absurd. That's like me wanting to go into the ring with Muhammad Ali. It was laughable to me.
I don't know what Donnie's particular pathology was. He was either egomaniacal or megalomaniacal. But something was screwy with the guy. And he also said, you know, you guys have got to sing and you got to play like we say to do it. Just get a grip, pal. This is not an enforceable covenant.
The scene was set for a showdown between the disgruntled Monkees and their creative master, Don Kirshner. It was to take place at the Beverly Hills Hotel and change forever the fortunes of the band.
I remember it quite clearly. We showed up at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Donnie Kirshner was there with a guy named Herb Moelis, who was a lawyer. They presented us with gold records and a huge check. Hey guys, basically what they were saying was just shut up and take the money.
I walk in with 4 checks for $250,000 for each of the boys, and I bring them a dub of Sugar Sugar, okay?
Sugar, oh honey, honey, you are my candy girl.
Don, nobody likes this music that you're making over here. I don't like it. The other guys didn't like it. What's going on with you? You're trying to create an empire or something here for yourself. Just back off.
You are my candy girl.
Mike said, we're not going to do that piece of junk, Sugar Sugar. Too bubblegum, too sappy, too pop. I'm not going to say, Sugar Sugar, you're my candy girl, you know? And I don't blame for Herb to saying, hey, fellas, you want to get cute with us? We have a contract. We can kick you out of the studio. We'll use 4 other guys. Don't tell me what you're going to do.
The contract. Let me see that.
He wagged the contract at me, and he said, well, you've got a contract, and this is the contract that you've got. And I smashed my fist through the wall. I said, yeah, well, that could have been your face, but...
Mike put his fist through a wall, which he really did. He actually, it's only chalkboard in California. And he said to this lawyer guy, if I'm not mistaken, he said, that could have been your face, motherfucker.
With artistic differences having reached such a critical point, it was clear there could be only one outcome from the meeting.
I knew that my relationship with the Monkees was over. You don't disrespect a guy that has just made you a millionaire, that's broke his back, spent 5 months in the studio, working day and night, flying in from New York, okay, and is right all the time. You know, that's not to pat myself on the back, that's in the history books. You know, I didn't think it was civil, and to tell you the truth, I never wanted to work with him again. It was over.
Mister, you give your whole life for a company, and then they just toss you aside.
Look, I'm sorry.
Don Kirshner knew what the 14-year-old girls wanted to hear because he had a 14-year-old heart and mind himself. He had also the emotional responsiveness of a 14-year-old. When we said we want to do this, he went, I'm taking my ball and going home. And that was that.
What Don Kirshner did was take manufactured pop to a new level, creating a very different band to sing his worldwide hit, Sugar Sugar.
I said to myself, you know, I want a group that doesn't talk back. So I created the Archies. you know, and did an animated show on television. Al sold the Monkees. We sold 10 million and had a group that didn't talk back to me.
Okay. All right, guys. Now listen. This is what we've been working on. See if you can pick this up, Mickey.
With Don Kirshner gone, the Monkees had the chance to become a real band and went back into the studio to record their own songs for their third album.
You like it?
Yeah, it's terrible. That's the worst thing.
Thanks very much, fellas. My second song.
But while Headquarters topped the American charts, it did so for just 1 week. The public, it seemed, preferred the music of the manufactured Monkees.
She's a wonderful lady and she's mine, all mine. And there doesn't seem a way that she won't come and lose my mind. It's too easy humming songs.
Here's a rare instance where a group decided to take less. They could have had more, but Nesmith and Torque in particular were willing to take less if they could authentically express what they felt in their music.
Why don't you cut your hair? Why don't you live up there? Why don't you do what I do? See what I feel when I care. Now they've done.
So what if it did fall off? They were happier. Maybe sometimes you have to compromise and give up, you know, the commercial number one in order to be a more satisfied artist doing number two.
But creative control cost the Monkees more than commercial success. Tensions within the band were emerging and frequently raging out of control.
There was always punch-ups going on. The only punch-up that never happened was between me and Mike Nesmith. But those punch-ups, you know, he got a couple of them by the throat a few times, you know. And yeah, Mickey and I had a little tussle once in a while, and Pete and I certainly did on the set. You know, he said something to me, and I, you know, gave him the Manchester kiss, you know what I mean? And so, bing!
Boom! And knocked me backwards. Next thing I know, there's a bunch of people holding me and a bunch of people holding Davey. And I get an arm loose and I reach around the guys and I give him one.
The fight that had held them together, which was to be a real group, had sort of unglued them. And the music that they made just got more and more idiosyncratic.
Now Mike wanted to be producer. Mickey wanted to direct some shows. Peter, you know, wasn't happy with the take in the studio. When you're dealing with three other people with different ideas, you've got to keep collective ideas, you know. And that was, I could see more than anything, the breakup of it.
As four strangers who had only been brought together to act in a TV show, it was obvious there was little to bind the Monkees together. And with doubts being raised about the shelf life of their program, the future was bleak.
I remember that there was talk about doing a third year of the series. I remember, you know, vaguely thinking, oh, I don't know, you know, it's kind of getting old now. So I think there was the general feeling it's time to move on.
It basically is imploding. At the same time as it's imploding, they come up with their greatest creative expression, which is Head.
With the TV show over and record sales plummeting, producer Bob Rafelson wanted to use the feature film Head to breathe life back into the Monkees. And to help him, he brought along an old pal.
One day, Bob Rafelson brought this guy on the set named Jack Nicholson, and he said, I want this guy to be involved in our movie.
Then an unknown B-movie actor, Jack Nicholson was about to become involved in the dramatic and bitter endgame of the Monkees. By 1968, the Monkees TV show had come to an end. But they had finally secured control over their music and were writing and recording new material. They were also about to appear in a Monkees movie called Head, something that had always been part of the master plan for producers Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson.
Listen to the band.
Both Bert and I were interested in making feature pictures. That's what we had joined together to do. And Bert said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I actually want to make a feature with the Monkees.
To write the screenplay, Bob Rafelson recruited his friend, an unknown young actor called Jack Nicholson.
I remember Jack because he'd come over to my house, we'd go out, we'd party. What he was doing, obviously, was like soaking up everything Monkee, everything about the Monkees. And obviously he and Bob had a plan.
We have listened to the band.
The plan for Bob Rafelson and Jack Nicholson was to use the Monkees movie to launch their own film careers. But tensions over money between the band and Rafelson meant the production got off to an acrimonious start.
Yeah, but about hitting a woman and everything.
The first day of shooting, they had been taken over by a new manager. And that manager tried to hold them back from shooting the picture until he got a better deal. So I went across the street and went into the negotiator's office and shook hands with the manager and took him by the hand and then threw him down 3 flights of stairs and said, the fucking picture's canceled, motherfucker, get off the lot. It's over. The Monkees are finished and so are you.
After bitter negotiations, Bob Rafelson and the band agreed to finish their movie. But the close relationship between the Monkees and the men who created them had suffered lasting damage.
All these little fissures and cracks starting to develop within the Monkees story during that movie and the making of the movie, and then it comes right on the screen. You see the Monkees sort of coming apart right before your eyes.
If you name a film Head, it's going to tank. What does the movie title even mean? What does the movie mean? If you look at it closely, it means the end of the Monkees' career, basically, at the time.
As the film bombed, the Monkees went into freefall. But for Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, Head successfully kicked off their movie careers. Shortly afterwards, they produced the cult film Easy Rider and left the Monkees far behind.
I always wanted the Monkees to succeed. I wanted them to endure. And I never doubted for a moment that that would not be the case. Some wanted to stay as part of a group, some wanted to have individual careers, but whatever they did, I wanted for them to be happy doing it and for them to do it well. I like the Monkees. I have fond memories of what we did and the madness of the 60s.
I don't have a tremendous amount of respect for Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson because of the way they treated us after the project was finished. I feel they abandoned our careers. They used us as much as they could. But it's up to me, to go after an acting role that instead of saying, it ruined my acting career and I could have been doing other things. No. So maybe it's up to me to go forward instead of just, backpedaling to the past.
Cheer up, sleepy Jean. Oh, what can it mean to a daydream believer and a homecoming queen?
I think the Monkees have endured over the last 40 years because they're the perfect group. They were 4 guys off the street from nowhere, become successful, all this crazy stuff happens to them, they smash the system, then the system smashes them, and here they are, they're still around to tell the story.
Mike Nesmith no longer likes to talk about his days as a Monkee. Today he's a multimedia entrepreneur and a multi-millionaire based in California.
Hello.
Today, Peter Tork lives in Connecticut, but is on the road regularly with his band, Shoe Suede Blues. Like the other Monkees, over the years, he's carried the burden of living with a famous face.
Nothing happened. I mean, it's, you know, I'm an alcoholic. And I was blessed enough to be able to get the other thing, which is recovery, sobriety. And I haven't found it necessary to drink or take a drug in over 25 years. Yay! Look what happened to Peter. He's sober! Look what happened to Peter. He's a pretty cheerful guy these days. Look what happened to Peter. Isn't it a shame? He's sober and cheerful. I don't know, man. Wow.
After the Monkees, Mickey Dolenz carved out a successful career behind the camera as a producer and director.
And here's the Wall of Shame.
But today he's returned to his roots and is an actor once again.
And there's Jack. And, oh, that's Paul. That's me at the Monterey Pop Festival. In my case, I just got off the train. And that's a great feeling. Not that I have anything against the Monkees, but that was great when I realized that I had just naturally sort of moved on. Sonny and Cher, Sammy Davis Jr., I was a big fan of. And so I never really had that problem of having to sing those songs. And they don't care about your new material. They don't want to hear, and this is one I just wrote. Yeah, shut up and just sing your hit, you know. Well, I never went through that.
Cheer up, sleepy Jean. Oh,
The story of the Monkees may have ended acrimoniously, but their manufactured pop songs have lasted long past their sell-by date, and Davy Jones continues to fly their flag.
cheer up, sleepy Jean. Oh, what daddy.
I can't see the Monkees ever being together again as an act on the stage. But you know, in a lot of people's minds, we're still together. We're still those four guys living on the beach. If that's what it's going to take to satisfy the four of us, then we should leave it the way it is, you know. Leave good enough alone. Son, leave good enough alone.
Okay. Let's hear it one more time with Davy Jones.
Well, I married a wife in the month of June, married by the light of the moon. We live down on Cripple Creek. We've been down there about a week. I'm going down to Cripple Creek, I'm going on a run. I'm going down to Cripple Creek to have a little fun. Going down to Cripple Creek, I'm going in a whirl. I'm going down to Cripple Creek to see my girl.
That's all, folks.